The Panthers signed another running back. Why?
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on the show, either at me or DM me to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side. It's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. The Panthers weren't kidding when they said that running backs matter. We just saw it not too long ago in the draft when they traded 2 fifth-round picks up into earlier in the second round to draft Jonathon Brooks out of Texas, coming off of an ACL tear, but the consensus top running back in the draft. Still, I don't think any of us thought running back was a primary need for the Panthers, something that they needed to address night 2 of the draft. Did not see that one coming, but Dave Canales, Dan Morgan, they stated several times now that running backs, they matter here in Carolina. And we saw that play out once again on Monday as reports were surfacing. The Panthers were interested in a former Seattle Seahawks running back and also a former first-round running back in Rashaad Penny. Then it was made official on Panthers.com later on Monday afternoon as the Panthers have agreed to terms of running back Rashaad Penny. Penny, who's currently 28, is a former first-round pick of the Seattle Seahawks in 2018. That's when he was drafted. And, of course, Panthers head coach Dave Canales and several of the staff members currently here in Carolina, now under Canales, were all there in Seattle when Penny was drafted. Pete Carroll was the head coach there for the Seattle Seahawks. Last year, Penny spent his season with the Philadelphia Eagles only playing in a grand total of 3 games. His best year came back in 2021 when he rushed for 749 yards and 6 touchdowns. Throughout his 45 games he's played in his career, he has 1,951 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns. And unfortunately for Penny, a guy that the Seahawks, and that's a team that would have been perfect for him had he been able to stay healthy, because Pete Carroll, defensive guy, loved to run the ball, had fairly reductive offense, and the whole let Russ cook thing. And part of the reason why Russ wanted to leave there in the first place was they like to run the ball. And when they were winning a Super Bowl and being highly successful, they had Marshawn Lynch. They had a great defense. He didn't really need to air it out. Russell Wilson was just a complementary part of what was a fantastic football team that all of us here in Carolina at the time hated, because they were our nemesis. Never forget that divisional round game. Cam was outstanding in that game, just couldn't get past Cam Chancellor and the Seattle Seahawks that day. Then what they did to him later on, pouring it on them in the divisional round again. There were some great battles with the Seattle Seahawks, and now it's kind of weird that a Seattle Seahawks groom coach is now the head coach here in Carolina. But the philosophy the Seahawks had about running the football is something that Dave Canales has said they're going to be stubborn about here in Carolina. And I think with the offensive line, which we talked about yesterday when looking at the overall offensive rebuild this offseason, they have no line that is capable of doing it. You look at the running backs that were already here before Penny even signed. I felt like the Panthers had running backs that were capable of being bell cows and guys that could break off big yardage and be sustainable and help lead the offense on the ground. And we've seen now Rashaad Penny is apparently possibly, I suppose, about to be a part of that. He'll have to make the roster, of course, but he has dealt with torn ACL, and when healthy, he has averaged 5.6 yards per carry. So looking at the Carolina Panthers running back room right now, you have Jonathon Brooks, who they just drafted in the second round of Texas. He has an ACL injury, which he's still recovering from, should be clear by July 1. Emphasis on should, does not mean he will be, and we'll see how things go once he gets, I guess, here at Uptown Charlotte. No more Spartanburg, no more Wofford College. Thanks a lot, David Tepper. Sorry, South Carolina. It's kind of messed up in my book that he did that. Training camp's not going to be up here, Mint Street. We'll see how Jonathon Brooks is feeling then. I believe when healthy, he'll be RB1. Chuba Hubbard, though, entering to the final year of his rookie deal. I feel like this should use him, abuse him, then lose him next March. Miles Sanders is still here. Raheem Blackshear, Tariq Cohen, Spencer Brown, Mike Boone, and now Rashaad Penny. That is the running back room here in Carolina. Now, this happens about 8 days after Dan Morgan, the Panthers GM, was asked questions about potentially trading Miles Sanders and whether the team still valued him. And this is what Dan Morgan had to say. He said, in terms of Miles, we love Miles. We see a big role for him. I think Dave Canales will tell you the same thing. We think really highly of Miles. We love Miles. Second time they said that they love Miles. He can do a lot for our offense. He's versatile in the pass game. And he's a really good runner. So we're excited about him as well. That's Dan Morgan on April 27th. On May 6th, Dan Morgan, Dave Canales, and the Carolina Panthers agreed to terms with Rashaad Penny, who didn't do anything in Philadelphia, but has a past relationship with this coaching staff and will get more of a chance here in Carolina where running backs matter than he would likely get with any of the other 31 teams in the NFL, which is why he was available on Monday, May 6th. This is interesting to me. It's interesting because we've had the conversation about what Jonathon Brooks coming to Carolina meant for Miles Sanders and even really meant for Chuba Hubbard. Now, when you add in Rashaad Penny, I do wonder, is this another sign of Miles Sanders' days being numbered here in Carolina? Or is it much to do about nothing? If he only played in 3 games last year, he has an extensive injury history, which this coaching staff knows about. Is he really coming in here to take Miles Sanders' job? He's not versatile. Sanders, Hubbard, and Sanders, that's what Dan Morgan said. But we've seen that since his first year with the Eagles, he has not been much of a threat out of the backfield catching the football. And we didn't see it last year. So he's not versatile. Neither is Chuba Hubbard. Neither is Rashaad Penny. But you know who is? Jonathon Brooks. They drafted Jonathon Brooks for a reason because they looked at the running back room and they felt like none of the guys fit what they needed and what they wanted as far as what that piece looks like in Dave Canales' offense. Now, adding Rashaad Penny is an interesting move just based off of the conversation that we've had about Miles Sanders, where if the Panthers wanted to, they can release him post June 1. The dead cap hit would be $7.495 million, and they would only save $200,000. They had no choice but to give him that $2 million roster bonus back in March because they would have lost about $2 million in salary cap space had they gotten rid of Sanders. And according to Joe Person, when I was reading one of his latest articles, the Panthers have about $9 million in salary cap space right now anyways, so they could not afford to have lost $2 million of that by getting rid of a running back who last year had his worst career season. Only 5 starts, only 129 attempts, 432 rushing yards, 3.3 yards per carry, the 3rd lowest in the NFL amongst all qualifying players. Sanders was dealing with a groin injury down in training camp in the preseason that caused him to miss out on all that, which is totally fine to me. If he's going to be your top running back, which we all expected that was going to be the case last year, there's already enough blows that those guys take. I didn't need to see him in the preseason, but once he was out there in the regular season, he did not contribute what the Panthers were expecting when they gave him 4 years, $21 million on his contract, which I hated at the time. And to this day, continue to hate as we see why you just don't pay running backs anything more than federal minimum wage, which I'm expecting is what Rashaad Penny is making. $7.25 an hour. No overtime, no holiday pay, no bonuses, none of that. 29 hours, no health insurance, don't ask for any of that. But you can tote the rock and then get out once a contract is over with, which I suppose is probably only a 1-year deal. I don't know if this necessarily means that Miles Sanders' days are numbered because I don't really see Rashaad Penny as being a better player than Miles Sanders. And at no point in his career has he been a better player than Miles Sanders has been since he's been in the NFL with Philadelphia and then last year in Carolina. At least Miles played last year. He got an opportunity. Rashaad Penny barely got an opportunity in Philadelphia, and I do question whether he's getting an opportunity here. Like Jonathon Brooks is going to be on the roster, obviously. Chuba Hubbard is going to be on the roster. Raheem Blackshear, didn't even really mention him. He's someone who can help the Panthers in a return game. You look at him and Xavier Legette. Those are the two guys you're expecting would be your kickoff returners, depending upon how much this staff wants to utilize Legette in that way. And if he's not ready to go as far as being a starter, that's a great way to get on the field and use that explosiveness with the rule changes. But him and Blackshear, both of those guys would be the primary kick returners for the Panthers this season. So I think Raheem should be on the roster because of what he provides. Tariq Cohen, probably more of a practice squad guy. Who knows? It's been a number of years since he suffered the knee injury, then the torn Achilles. That was just heartbreaking to see him go through on IG Live. Then last year, a lot of questions about what can he provide to the offense. Unfortunately, he got injured again. Now back healthy. Does he get an opportunity as a special teams player for Carolina? So I just don't really see like where like Miles Sanders fits in all this. I also don't see where Rashaad Penny fits into all this. And the one thing that was really interesting to me was what Jeremy Fowler of ESPN had to say, because he was the first one I saw who reported this about Rashaad Penny coming to terms at Carolina, or at least he was set to agree with them, because he came out and said that the signing likely happening after rookie minicamp, which is this weekend. So they're going to wait and see when it happened. It already happened so far. Now, when I first looked at it, I thought I read that it was just minicamp, which is not happening until June, which then would raise an eyebrow and make you go, you're just waiting for that post-June 1. He's going to be on the roster, and at least for now, he's a training camp body, and we'll see what that means for really everybody not named Jonathon Brooks and Chuba Hubbard. What does it mean for Miles Sanders? And maybe even to a lesser extent, what does it mean for Raheem Blackshear? I don't think Miles is going to be around much longer. I don't believe a damn word that Dan Morgan says when he says that. They think highly of Miles Sanders, that they have a role for him, like a big role, a big role, which is what he said. There's no big role for Miles Sanders. If the big role is, it's going to be the dead cap hit and the paltry $200,000 that you save once you get rid of him. And that will be it. That's the only role I could see. It's not a big one, but it's a role, I suppose. So Panthers add another running back. Cool. All right. So that happened. Another thing that we want to happen is the Panthers bring in Stephon Gilmore. That's not happened yet. Is it going to happen? Are we trending towards that not happening? Is it time to move on? I'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. We've all been there, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull up some bank heists and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's a Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with the wrecking ball. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. The Panthers added another running back on Monday, and if there was going to be any sort of free agent acquisition, you weren't hoping to see RB, but you were hoping to see CB, meeting quarterback, and specifically Stephon Gilmore, who's just, I assume, chilling here in Charlotte right now, biding his time, likely doesn't want to waste it at OTAs, which is going to be at the end of the month here in Carolina, then mandatory minicamp next month in June. He's probably just waiting until training camp happens, and really after training camp happens, and once the preseason is really rocking and rolling, he doesn't want to waste his time doing any of that kind of stuff, and I get it. He's a former NFL Defensive Player of the Year. He's an All-Pro. He's a multi-time Pro Bowler, and coming off of pretty solid seasons in Indianapolis and Dallas, respectively, the last 2 years. So why, as a veteran, what do you want to sign with a team right now? Unless there's some certain contract incentives he's trying to get. And we know that most of the money that's been spent free agency is gone, and whatever deal he signs is likely going to be incentive-laden, but he would like to at least get, I'm thinking, $9 million guaranteed at the very least. I don't know. That's just my guess based off of who he is and what he's been able to do as he stayed healthy and played in all but one game the past 2 seasons with the Colts And with the Cowboys, we've been sitting here wondering, is he going to be a Carolina Panther? Dan Morgan, the Panthers general manager, has left the door open for Stephon Gilmore to return to Carolina, where he spent the 2021 season as a Panther very briefly after being traded for, something that just absolutely shocked me. The Panthers went all in on getting corners, especially after J.C. Horn went down. They brought in C.J. Henderson, and we know how that worked out. Stephon Gilmore didn't really work out the best of the Panthers, ended up being a Pro Bowl alternate and got into the Pro Bowl that season, even though didn't play that many games. And once he started, and not too soon after that, he went down with a season-ending injury, but still a really good player and someone that Jadeveon Clowney, his former South Point High and South Carolina Gamecock teammate, has advocated for him to come back to Carolina to do the homecoming, just like Clowney is doing. And maybe Stephon's already done that. He's done it in the past. Does he want to do it again, or is he trying to find a contender to latch onto and be their number 2, probably like number 3 corner? I don't know what he's expecting, but I was expecting there to be more movement post-draft because that's what Dan Morgan told us. But then again, Dan Morgan did also tell us that Miles Sanders has a big role here and how much they love him and how highly they think of him. And they drafted a running back in Jonathon Brooks, who's definitely going to be ahead of him in the depth chart. And then they just brought in another running back in Rashaad Penny, who I suppose could take his roster spot. I don't know whether that will be the case or not, but that's something to consider, as we just did moments ago. But Joe Person of The Athletic, he did have an update on Monday as far as Stephon Gilmore and whether he will be a Panther now, later, or at all. Joe had this to say: there's been no movement on this front despite the media interest. Maybe something will materialize with Gilmore closer to training camp, but nothing's happening now. Nothing's happening now. Gilly's chilling. Dan Morgan, I guess, on the same street. He's chilling. And we're all waiting as fans, and me, your humble podcast host, to see what happens. I have some serious concerns about the Carolina Panthers cornerback room. I really do. J.C. Horn, who I hate it. We always have to have the caveat, is a great player. The problem is doesn't play. Missed 29 out of possible 59 games. That's just not tenable. Tenable enough, apparently, for the Panthers to exercise fifth-year option. Had the show about that over a week ago. Understood why they did it, understood why they wouldn't do it had they decided to not do it. But they did it. Good player. He's someone that's worth the risk, especially at a position group where if you didn't give it to him, not a lot there outside of, I guess, Dane Jackson, who's now going to step into currently this starting role opposite of J.C. Horn. He spent the last 4 seasons as the number 3 corner in Buffalo and has had to step up and be a starter when Tre'Davious White got injured in Buffalo the last couple of seasons. So he's has plenty of experience and someone that Dan Morgan loved. I just wonder if he's ready, and if he is the right guy to be that number 2, and if he's even an upgrade from Dante Jackson, who was available last year and a fine player. Dante's not going to wow you. The interceptions happen early in his career. A lot of that can be luck, if we're being honest with ourselves. But Dante, solid player, not great, but someone, if he's healthy, it's a experienced body who is no longer here in Carolina. And I question whether the guy that they brought in who's younger is a better player for them than what Dante could have been for them next year. But they decided to move on. They got Deontay Johnson back in the process, and I don't think anyone can really fret over that at all, as Panthers desperately needed a wide receiver who could separate and make plays, is what they're hoping to be getting out of Deontay Johnson this upcoming season in 2024. But outside of JC and Dane Jackson, Troy Hill, he's over 30, played well last year. One of the, feel-good stories, if you want to call it that. One of the bright spots, probably the better term, last year in that defense that was extremely banged up. He played well. He got a contract to come back here in Carolina, likely the starting nickel. They just drafted Charles Smith-Wade out of Washington State to come in to likely be a nickel, but he also can play outside. And there's a great story. It was from Mike Kay on the Charlotte Observer, where he talked about how Charles Smith-Wade really didn't play the nickel at all until he got thrust into that role at the Senior Bowl, ended up getting 2 interceptions, becomes defensive MVP in that game. Great job by him, and that raised his stock, and is the reason why the Panthers looked at him in the 5th round and decided to take him. But he's not, right now, it doesn't seem like, coming in here to be a competitor on the outside. He could play it, but I don't think that's necessarily what they're expecting him to do. You have DiCaprio Bootle, who had to play last year. You also have Deshaun Jameson. I just don't see that true starter level corner for the Panthers aside from JC. And I guess Dane Jackson, but really probably better as your number 3 guy than your actual number 2. And I could be selling him short. I'm not quite so sure. And I do wonder this too. This is a great point that Joe brought up that I completely missed on. Gilmore, he's going to be 34 in September, so he's an older player, as we know. But he is scheduled to undergo offseason labrum surgery after saying it in the Cowboys regular season finale. He wore a shoulder harness in that playoff embarrassment against the Green Bay Packers on MLK Day weekend. So I don't know where he's at there, whether he's had surgery and what the rehab process would be. The last time the Panthers got Gilmore, he was on PUP before he was able to even play. Like, he was on PUP when they traded for him. Is he going to be on PUP going into the season, considering it's something that did not occur until January, the labrum injury, and not so sure when, if he has. I assume he's probably, if he's planning on playing the season, I assume he's already had the surgery. Not quite so sure how long that rehab process will be for him and if he would be even ready to go anyway. So it may be one of the situations where, guys, I'm not even ready anyways to go out there. So I'm not going to be out of OT. I'm not going to be a mandatory minicamp anyway. So maybe just let's get back to have these conversations in August. That may be where this is going. Now, there's some other available options for the Panthers if they wanted to go younger, and that's something that Joe said that they could consider doing. J.C. Jackson, who was recently in New England, I saw reports that could potentially be a return for him after the Patriots cut him. He's out on the market, used to be one of those high-paid free agents. When he left New England to go to San Diego, L.A. Chargers, whatever, and didn't really work out there. Dory Jackson, former first-round pick in Tennessee, went to New York the last couple seasons. Okay player. He's available. Eli Apple's another name that we know was here briefly in Carolina and then wasn't here in Carolina anymore. He's had his ups and downs on some decent teams, honestly. He's somebody the Panthers could look at. And outside of that, there's just not a ton of great names for players who have experience as starters and that are also kind of under 30. And all those guys are. So we'll see how it works out for Carolina and Stephon Gilmore. It does not appear, according to Joe Person's reporting, that this is something that's going to get figured out now and doesn't need to be figured out now. The Panthers do not play a game until September. We don't even know the schedule. We know the schedule. The teams are playing. We don't know the dates yet. So we haven't even gotten to that process of the NFL schedule dates release. Not schedule release, the schedule dates release. So once we get to August, and we get into this and we see what the corners look like and the depth there is still going to be questionable, then maybe it's time to panic. But right now, it's good to just know that there's no movement, and it's probably something we should not obsess over just for our mental well-being until, of course, training camp rolls around and we see that, maybe the depth isn't that great. Maybe the top end talent outside of JC Horn isn't that great in the cornerback room for Carolina. But TBD on how all that plays out down the road. So hat tip to Joe Person of The Athletic for the reporting there. Okay, so another news item came out last week, and this is something that fans were wondering when Dan Morgan took the job, how many changes would happen in the front office. Well, we got some changes. Maybe not the seismic kind of change that you would have hoped. I don't know if that's what you wanted to see, but we'll talk about the changes that happen and what that means for the current power structure in Carolina moving forward right here on Locked On Panthers. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So if you are a big Canes fan, whether the Canes win or lose, you're getting $150. Go out there and do it. If you're willing to bet on other Stanley Cup playoff teams, go ahead and do it. You want to bet on the NBA playoffs, the Knicks, if you're buying into that as a legitimate contender in the Eastern Conference, go for it. Doesn't matter whether you win or lose, $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you do. Bet on everything from slap shots, the home runs, the slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Sports betting has been here since March 11th. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You got to love a good old Friday news dump, and that's something that happened last week as the Carolina Panthers parted ways with 3 members of their scouting staff. Director of Pro Scouting, Rob Hanrahan, Assistant Director of Pro Scouting, Tyler Ramsey, and Area Scout Michael Coe were sent packing by Panthers General Manager Dan Morgan, a move that really isn't all that surprising. Maybe the names may have surprised you, but a move that shouldn't be surprising. This is what happens. Once a general manager takes over, he's going to keep all the scouts, going to keep a lot of people that are already in the front office working underneath him, have them all the way throughout the draft process as there's the combine that's going to go on. There's this Senior Bowl that's going on. There's, of course, the pro days, the top 30 visits, and the scouts have to give them their reports. You're not going to get rid of these guys prior to the draft. You're going to get rid of them post-draft after they've already done the work. And it's unfortunate that's how it works. That's just how it works. Now is the time for Dan Morgan to start building the scouting side of the Panthers organization, which he was ahead of prior to taking over as a general manager and president of football operations. This is now his opportunity to build it in the image that he wants it to be moving forward so that the Panthers can get those dogs that he keeps telling us about, and they keep getting running backs instead, which could hopefully work out. I like Jonathon Brooks. Penny, I don't know, whatever. So that happened. Hanrahan spent 7 years in Carolina after arriving from Buffalo, and Ramsey had worked in Seattle with Morgan and former Panthers general manager Scott Fitter, of course. Coe came to Charlotte just 2 years ago, following a stint with the Senior Bowl down in Mobile. So those 3 are no longer in the building, and we'll see kind of how this goes moving forward, especially Director of Pro Scouting. That's obviously important to go find free agents and to get the right guys coming in here and help out. And it's both positions, the pro scouting director and assistant pro scouting director, and then going and finding another area scout to help out this team. You got to see the scouting part of it get much better here in Carolina. That has been a major issue for this team for, it feels like, a long time, and they've still been able to have success. Now, we've not had the sustained success that we would have hoped for, that we have been promised by David Tepper, and we'll see if that ever happens under his ownership. I do think that the Panthers will have success one day, will be sustained. That is something that needs to see a lot of areas change for that to really play out one day. But you got to have hope. You have to have belief. And why else would you watch it if you didn't have hope and belief in the Panthers organization to finally be something that they haven't been, but really, I think, should have been by this point in time in this franchise's history, especially under this new ownership, where just get the football right, which is what Dave Canales has been talking about since he took over the job here back in January. So interesting time for Dan Morgan to be able to fill his scouting staff and really fill out the front office in the way that he wants to be. And this is pretty clear right now that the power structure in Carolina, it's Dan Morgan. Got Dave Canales, of course, as the head coach, executive vice president of football operations, Brant Tillis, handling the salary cap and contracts, vice president of player personnel, Adrian Wilson. He's still hanging around here. Director of player personnel, Cole Spencer, and director of college scouting, Jared Kirksey. All those guys are important pieces. All those guys by name, Dan Morgan mentioned during his NFL draft press conferences. So now we've seen all of those guys are still here. Now, Canales is not going anywhere. Tillis is not going anywhere. You could have questions of whether Wilson would stick around, and he just came in last year, so I don't really see why he would have been a part of any sort of staff shakeup. As far as Cole Spencer goes and Jared Kirksey, could have seen that for sure happening just based off of the roles that they've had. And Spencer had a role of college scouting in the past, and we've seen how the college scouting has played out with the Panthers and the guys they've taken in the draft, and those guys who are not here anymore and who were here were a part of a 2-15 season last year and have not been a part of a playoff team in their time in Carolina in recent years. So interesting to see how that plays out moving forward and to see that this is your power structure, hoping that David Tepper is taking a step back and allowing Dan Morgan, Dave Canales, and Brant Tillis to cook, as a lot of the fans were saying they did this offseason, especially in the draft. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Friday I'll be back here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me to get those questions into me now. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Wednesday.